the storyteller. I'm here to tell you a story. And if you want me to, I can tell you stories for 10 hours straight. If you watch me, you can see my eyes and mouth move just like yours. So, why don't you watch and listen now as I tell you one of my favorite stories, Goldilocks and the 3 Bears. Once upon a time, there were 3 bears who lived in a little cottage in the woods. The father was a great, big, enormous bear. The mother was a medium, middle-sized bear, and the baby was a wee, tiny bear. One morning, Father Bear said, "Let's take a walk before breakfast." "Very well," said Mother Bear. "We'll put our porridge on the table to cool." But while they were gone, a little girl named Goldilocks came to their house. She had been playing in the woods, and when she saw the pretty house, she was curious. Pushing open the door, she walked in. It was just as pretty inside. "Well, well," she said to herself, "breakfast is ready, and I am hungry." Father Bear's porridge was in a great, big, enormous bowl. Goldilocks tasted it first, but it was too hot. Next, she tasted Mother Bear's porridge in the medium, middle-sized bowl, but it was too cold. Then she saw Baby Bear's porridge in the wee, tiny bowl. It was just right, so Goldilocks ate it all up. Next, she decided to try out the chairs. The great, big, enormous chair was too high. The medium, middle-sized chair was too deep. But the wee, tiny chair was just right. Goldilocks was so happy that she jumped up and down on it until, crack, she broke the chair. Then she went upstairs, and there she saw 3 beds standing in a row. She was feeling tired, so she decided to take a short nap. First, she lay down on the great, big bed, but it was too hard. Then she lay down on the middle-sized bed, but it was too soft. Finally, she tried the wee, tiny bed, and it was so comfortable that she fell sound asleep. After a while, the bears came home for their breakfast. But what was this? Spoons in the bowls instead of beside them. "Somebody's been tasting my porridge," said Father Bear in his great, big, enormous voice. "Somebody's been tasting my porridge," said Mother Bear in her medium, middle-sized voice. "Somebody's been tasting my porridge," said Baby Bear in his little, wee, tiny voice, "and it's all gone." Just then, Father Bear noticed that the pillows on the chairs didn't look quite straight.
"Somebody's been sitting in my chair," growled the great big bear.
"Somebody's been sitting in my chair," said the middle-sized bear. "Somebody's been sitting in my chair," squeaked the wee tiny bear. "And they have broken it to pieces." So he began to cry wee tiny bear tears. Then the three bears went upstairs.
"Somebody's been lying in my bed,"
said Father Bear in his great, big, enormous voice. "Somebody's been lying in my bed," said Mother Bear in her medium, middle-sized voice. "Somebody's been lying in my bed, and here she is," said Baby Bear in his wee, tiny voice. Right then, Goldilocks opened her eyes and saw the three bears staring at her. She was so frightened that she jumped straight out of bed, raced down the stairs, and out the front door, and she ran and ran until she got all the way home, and she never went back to the three bears' house ever again. Well, I hope you enjoyed that story. I certainly enjoyed telling it. So, why don't you keep watching me and listening to me as I tell you another wonderful story? Once upon a time, there lived a little girl who had a pretty red cape with a bright red hood. She always wore her red-hooded cape, and that is why everyone called her Little Red Riding Hood. One day, her mother packed a basket with cakes and fruit. She said to Little Red Riding Hood, "This is a gift for you to take to your grandmother. She is not well and will enjoy some nice cake and fruit." So, Little Red Riding Hood put on her red cape and hood and set out for Grandmother's house. As she was going through the woods, she met a big wolf. The wolf said to her in a gruff voice, "Good morning, little girl. Where are you going with that nice basket of cake and fruit?" Little Red Riding Hood answered, "I am going to visit my grandmother." "Well, well," said the wolf politely, "I'm going to visit your grandmother too." The crafty old wolf knew where Grandmother lived, so while Little Red Riding Hood stopped along the way to pick some flowers and to watch butterflies flitting among the trees, the wicked wolf arrived at Grandmother's house long before she got there. He peeked in the window and saw Grandmother sitting in her rocking chair. But Grandmother saw the wolf, too. She jumped out of the chair, slipped into the closet, and quickly locked the door so the big bad wolf could not get her. The wolf crept into the house. He tried to open the closet door, but could not. Then he saw Grandmother's nightcap and shawl hanging on a peg. "Aha!" he cried. "I'll put on Grandmother's nightcap and shawl,
and get into bed. Little Red Riding Hood will think that I'm her grandmother.
Well, pretty soon, Little Red Riding Hood knocked on the door.
"Who's there?"
said the wolf, pretending to be grandmother. "It is I, grandmother," said Little Red Riding Hood.
"Come in, my dear,"
said the wolf in his most gentle voice. He pulled the covers up around his chin. "Oh, grandmother," cried Little Red Riding Hood, standing beside the bed. "What big, bright eyes you have."
"The better to see you with, my dear,"
replied the wolf softly. Little Red Riding Hood came closer. "Oh, grandmother, what big ears you have."
"The better to hear you with, my dear,"
said the wolf still more softly. Then Little Red Riding Hood leaned over the bed. "And, grandmother, what big teeth you have," she whispered.
"The better to eat you with,"
cried Wolf, and he pushed back the covers and sprang out of bed. Then Little Red Riding Hood knew that it was the wolf pretending to be her grandmother. She screamed as loud as she could. But that very moment, a woodsman was passing by. He heard Little Red Riding Hood's screams and broke into the house just in time to save her from the wolf. But the wolf slipped past the woodsman and ran off into the trees.
"Never mind,"
said the woodsman.
"I'll catch him."
And he ran into the woods after the wolf. Then grandmother came out of the closet where she had been hiding and made a delicious lunch of milk, cake, and fruit for Little Red Riding Hood and herself. They had just sat down to eat when the woodsman came back.
"The wolf will never bother you again,"
he said. Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother thanked the woodsman and asked him to stay for lunch. He did so gladly, for he was very hungry. Afterward, he walked with Little Red Riding Hood through the woods to her mother's house, where she lived happily for many years, and she never met another wolf again. The Storyteller. I'm here to tell you a story, and if you want me to, I can tell you stories for 10 hours straight. If you watch me, you can see my eyes and mouth move just like yours. So, why don't you watch and listen now as I tell you one of my favorite stories, The 3 Little Pigs. Once upon a time, there were 3 little pigs who went out one day to seek their fortunes. Each little pig took a different road. Soon, the first little pig met a man with a load of straw. "Please, may I have some straw to build a house?" asked the little pig. The man, being very nice, gave the little pig some straw. The first little pig had just finished his house of straw when a big, bad wolf came along. Little pig, let me come in," said the wolf. "No, not by the hair on my chinny chin chin," said the little pig. "Then I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house in," cried the wolf. So he huffed and he puffed
and he blew the house in.
The next little pig met a man with a bundle of twigs. "Please, may I have some twigs to build a house?" asked the little pig. This man, being very nice also, gave the second little pig some twigs. The second little pig had just finished his house of twigs when the big bad wolf came along.
Little pig, let me come in,"
said the wolf. "No, not by the hair on my chinny chin, said the little pig.
"Then I'll huff, and I'll puff, and I'll blow your house in,"
cried the wolf. So he huffed, and he puffed, and he puffed, and he huffed, and he blew the house in. Now the third little pig, who was the smartest pig, met a man who had a wheelbarrow full of bricks. "Please, may I have some bricks to build a house?" asked the little pig. This man was also very nice and gave him some bricks. But no sooner had the third little pig finished his house than the big bad wolf came along.
Little pig, let me come in,"
he cried. "No, not by the hair on my chinny chin, said the little pig.
"Then I'll huff, and I'll puff, and I'll blow your house in,"
cried the wolf. So he huffed, and he puffed, and he puffed, and he huffed, and he huffed, and he puffed again, but he could not blow the house in. The wolf was very angry and thought to himself,
"I must catch that little pig."
So he said,
"There are some nice fat turnips in Farmer Brown's field. Will you go with me to get some at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning, little pig?"
"Yes, I will," said the little pig. But he got up at 5 o'clock instead, and was home cooking his turnips when the wolf came to call for him. The big bad wolf was very, very angry, but he thought of another way to catch the little pig.
"I know where there is a fine red apple tree. Will you go with me at 5 o'clock tomorrow morning to pick some apples?"
"Yes, I will," said the little pig. But the little pig went for the apples at 4 o'clock. He had not started early enough, however, and he was still up in the tree when the wolf came along.
"Are the apples sweet?"
asked the wolf. "Yes," said the little pig. "I will throw you one." So he threw an apple as far as he could. And while the wolf went to get it, the little pig climbed down the tree and ran home. Early the next morning, the wolf hurried to the little pig's house. He had to catch that pig, so he climbed up on the roof and slid down the chimney. But the little pig had seen him coming and took the lid off a large kettle of water, which was on the fire. There was a great big splash, and that was the end of the big bad wolf. Well, I hope you enjoyed that story. I certainly enjoyed telling it. So, why don't you keep watching me and listening to me as I tell you another wonderful story. In the beautiful countryside, it was just another summer day. There, a mother duck was sitting on her nest. She was tired of sitting, for it had been such a long time. But at last, her ducklings were about to be hatched. One egg after another began to crack. All the chicks were poking their heads out. "Cheep, cheep," they said. "How big the world is!" "I suppose you are all here now," said their mother, looking around. "No, that big egg is still uncracked." Sighing, she settled herself on the nest again. At last, the big egg cracked, and the young one came tumbling out. The mother duck stared at him. "What a strange, big duckling," she said. "None of the others look like that. Can he be a turkey duck? Well, we'll soon find out." The next day was sunny and fine, and the mother duck went down to the lake with her new family. Splash! Into the water she sprang. "Quack! Quack!" she said, and one duckling after another plumped into the water after her. They floated beautifully. Even the big, ugly gray one swam about with them. Then they went to the duck yard. The other ducks stared at them and said, "Look, how ugly that duckling is. We won't stand for him." And one duck flew at him and bit him on the neck. "Leave him alone," said the mother duck. "He isn't doing any harm." But the poor, ugly duckling was made fun of by all the other ducks. He did not know what to do or where to go. "I think I will go out into the world," said the ugly duckling. One evening, when the sun was setting, a flock of beautiful, large birds appeared out of the bushes. The ugly duckling had never seen anything so beautiful. They were dazzling white, with long, curving necks. Of course, these birds were swans. The ugly duckling felt drawn to them, though he did not know why. Then, uttering a strange cry, the swans spread their wings and flew away to warmer lands for the winter. It would be too sad to tell about all the misery the ugly duckling had to bear during the hard winter. But at last, the sun began to warm the skies again. It found the duckling in the marsh among the rushes. Then, all at once, he raised his wings, and they flapped with much greater strength than ever before, and they bore him off the ground. Before he knew it, he found himself in a large garden. Just in front of him were 3 beautiful swans. The duckling recognized them, and he was filled with a strange sadness. He flew into the water and swam toward the stately swans. But what did he see reflected in the water? He saw below him his own image, but he was no longer a clumsy, dark gray bird. He was a swan. The big swans swam around him and stroked him with their bills. Some little children came into the garden, and the smallest one cried out, "There is a new one!" The other children shouted with joy, "Yes, a new swan has come!" And one and all said, "The new one is the prettiest of them all." The new swan felt quite shy and hid his head under his wing. He thought of how he had been pursued and scorned, and now he heard them all say that he was the most beautiful of all beautiful birds. He rustled his feathers and said, "I never dreamed there could be so much happiness when I was the Ugly Duckling."